Unfortunately, we won't be able to fit all of you, so get your tickets early for that. We're going to happily have Lisa Jo Rudy is doing Aladdin here in the So wonderful that the Wistful Theater Company is getting so busy that we need alternative space. So please become a member, support us. We're really trying to do good things and get as many people up on stage as possible, including kids, which is really fun. So I'm excited about tonight. I wanted to tell you a couple of housekeeping issues. Exits behind you, of course, and down the stairs and out the door. Bathrooms, key thing. Down the stairs into the front of the building. It has been told that some people go to the Cat and Kid. It's rainy, you probably want to stay in the house. But anyway, but I've heard that that's a pit stop of sorts. Also, no flash photography. Please turn off your cell phones. We are all Pavlov's dog, right? When a cell phone goes off, that you could distract our tellers, and they've worked really hard to be here tonight. It's been so much fun for me because I've had the privilege of meeting with almost all of them a couple times, and we've story workshopped their stories, and I think you're going to be in for quite a treat. Coming up in October is a very funny show. Please get your tickets for that. It's called Silver Lining, and our wonderful Shannon Sylvia, who's doing the tech for tonight, is the director. It's her first director job, and she's got the best cast, and she's doing a brilliant job. But the coolest thing about it, and we did not plan this, is that it's about 5 elderly women trapped in a nursing home during a flood. I mean, timely, right? It is hysterical, and it's British, so there's some wonderful. I'm a student of the British pun, and I love this script. It's going to be great fun. So that's starting in October, and it's in your program. So please grab one of these, okay? I think that's all for me. So I'm going to invite out our first teller, and this would be Diane Mandeville. First technical thing, we don't have a clicker.
It's on the piano.
Oh, it's on the piano. Oh, thank you so much. Well, you know, if you don't rehearse, can you? You have to click through. Oh, there you are. Sorry. I'll have it for tomorrow. Come on back.
Hi. Imagine being invited to a wedding and seated at the family table with your ex-boyfriend, his ex-wife, and his current girlfriend. Well, it really did happen, but it really was a happy occasion, but I'm going to back up a little. About 15 years ago, I had the good fortune to become friends with a man named Dan. We were part of a weekly biking group, and along the way, his son Mark joined us, and later on Mark's girlfriend Melanie and Dan's girlfriend Mary. So Mark, Melanie, and I all worked in school, so we had summers off. So there was lots of time for biking and getting together for dinners and lunches, and pretty soon we met for holidays and birthdays and became quite good friends. So one day in the summer of 2009, Dan and I were biking on Block Island with Mark, who was in grad school at the time, and Mark and I went into a shop to get an ice cream. The clerk, who was a woman about my age, with whom Mark was acquainted, asked, "Is this your mom?" And Mark said, Mark didn't get to say anything. I jumped in and said, "Oh no, I can't take credit for him." Mark was and is one of the most wonderful young men I've ever met, I've ever known. He is a school psychologist. He's an officer in the National Guard, and he shares his dad's intelligence, good humor, and integrity. But I'd never met Mark's mom, Lolly, until the happy occasion, the wedding, when I was seated at the family table, and she greeted me with, "So this is the famous Diane I've heard so much about." And it was very sincere and genuine, and I was so pleased to be part of this little family on this special day. So we all became pretty close. Mark and his mom Lolly, I didn't get to know that well at first. Mark's dad and his girlfriend and I became pretty good friends, and here we are at the wedding. So I saw Lolly again 2 summers later when Dan had a pool party. Mark was taking a swim. Lolly and I were seated side by side in lawn chairs, and Dan was cooking and grilling with his girlfriend Mary and 2 other female friends. And Lolly said, "Oh, look at Dan and his women," and we laughed. And it was only then that I noticed she had a little bit of a southern accent. So she explained that she was born and brought up in Tennessee, something I hadn't known. Then she went into full force southern talk, much to my delight. So I became pretty close to Mark and Melanie and Dan. And I didn't see Lolly again until actually the pool party. I never did see her again. That fall, I'm going to put a picture of, I'm not sure what the picture is. The pictures are hard to do.
Graduation.
Oh, that's Mark at his graduation with his mom. Okay, so I never did see her again. That fall she had foot surgery, and I sent her some thick fuzzy socks, the same kind I had when I had foot surgery. We exchanged Thanksgiving and Christmas cards, then a fierce winter gave way to spring, and on the spring day, Lolly died. Alone, young, and suddenly. My heart grieved for Mark, her only child, and Mark and Melanie went about doing the things one must do when a loved one passes, and then a beautiful memorial service was held. Then summer came. Mark, Melanie, and I were all out of school, and Mark and Melanie were cleaning the house and clearing it to be sold, and I showed up to help. What I found when I arrived was a home full of, I'm going to put Lolly's picture up here, a home full of interesting things surrounded by flowers. Imagine inside bright blue glass, pottery, blue willow china, antique bottles arranged on shelves, the kind of stuff you'd find in my home. And on this really hot, humid day, I got the best job, I got the books. So seated on the rug with a fan hitting me, for a full day I sorted the books. And I put piles together for people I knew who had particular interests, counted and sorted the rest to go to Goodwill and boxed them up. But it wasn't until a week later when I was on book duty for the second time that I realized I'd been given a gift. And the gift was getting to know Lolly through her books. In perusing Lolly's books, I found a woman with an incredible curiosity for life. I found that she loved to travel. Italy, Spain, England, Scotland were travel destinations represented in large coffee table books. Foreign language dictionaries, foreign language tapes. There were many cookbooks representing those countries, Lolly's home state of Tennessee and her adopted Rhode Island home. Many books on psychology reminded me that Lolly shared the same career as her ex-husband and that Mark, their son, had followed in the same path. There were children's books, many that I thought, children's books that I thought Mark, she had saved for Mark, for the grandchildren she probably hoped to have one day. There were books on the Civil War showing me she had a keen interest in that. And I wondered, did Lolly have an intense interest in fashion, or could she just not bear to throw out 3 perfectly preserved ladies' home journals from 1900, 1901, and 1902? Why would I not? Oh, gardening. The gardens around her home were beautiful, and there were tons of gardening books. I found a book with tabbed pages indicating that she perhaps had planned to plant crabapple trees, azaleas, ferns, and evergreens. There was a list of flowers in Lolly's handwriting, including a really poignant Jacob's Ladder, Stairway to Heaven. And poetry. Why would I not be surprised that Lolly loved poetry? Lacing her love of nature and flowers, living alone in a tiny cottage in Rhode Island, to my life, living in a tiny cottage surrounded by flowers here in Cape Cod, Lolly and I both shared a love of poetry. There were titles by Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the beat poet. And I imagined Lolly sitting on the lawn at Brown University on a sunny day on a blanket, maybe listening to Ferlinghetti read his poems out loud. There were many novels, some I had read and delighted that she had too, like The Road from Corinne by Jill Kerr Conway. You must read this, I said to Melanie, giving her the book. Jill Kerr Conway grew up on a remote sheep station in Australia, never saw another girl child until she was 10, and went on to be the first woman president of Smith College. So on this second day with Lolly's books, it was amazing, the connection that I felt with her. I took home a book on the most beautiful drives in the country, tabbed pages indicating drives that maybe Lolly took or planned to take. Maybe I would have taken with her. So about a year after Lolly's death, Mark called me to tell me that he and Melanie were divorcing. He told me that he called me second only after his dad because he thought of me as a second mother. So through my friendship with Dan and Mark, I'd received the gift of family. Not the kind of family one is born into, but the kind of family one chooses. A chance seating at her son's wedding and sitting beside her at a pool party brought Lolly to me as a friend, and she lives in my memory as a dear one. And the blessing of a family by design, a family that I didn't choose, came to me. Family by design, something totally unexpected and lovely. I'd like to introduce our next storyteller, Paul Apthorpe.
Performers do this, I always wondered how it worked. Hello, my name is Paul Anfel. I'd like to tell you a story tonight about a man by the name of Robert Barrington, who I met while on vacation in the Caribbean island of Montserrat in the summer of 1971, and how that vacation changed my life. But before I tell you about Robert Barrington, I've got to give you some information about my own family background. My mother arrived in this country in 1924 at the age of 21. She arrived with her older brother, my Uncle Murray, from a small city in central Poland. They were the two oldest children in a family of 10 children, which of course included her parents, my grandparents. If you're looking at the picture to my left, that's my mother in the rear in the white blouse. To her right is my Uncle Murray. Seated in a chair beneath her is my Uncle Ben, and on the floor is the baby of the family, my Uncle Robert. Now, I tell you all these names mainly because they will become important figures in the remainder of my story. So there were 10 children in the Blum family. That was the family name. They, like other immigrants, wanted to establish themselves in America, become citizens, and eventually, like all other immigrants, start bringing over other members of their family. But unfortunately, world events conspired against them. In 1925, the United States passed a series of very restrictive immigration laws meant to reduce immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. In October of 1929 was the great stock market crash, which led to the Great Depression of the 30s, which almost completely eliminated immigration into the country. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. In 1935, Germany passed the Nuremberg laws, which took away the citizenship rights of German Jewish citizens. In early 1938, Hitler invaded Austria and spread the Nuremberg laws to that nation. And later in 38, in November of 38, an event which Germans called Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, occurred, which Jews around the world commemorate as the start of the Holocaust. And then finally, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II began. Many European Jews successfully were able to leave Germany for safer locations. One of them was my Uncle Ben. He managed to leave Poland and make his way to Palestine, where he worked on a communal farm. Eventually, with the help of my mother and my Uncle Ben made his way to New York, and after the United States entered the war in December of 41, he would join the U.S. Army. He survived the war and would make a career of the U.S. Army. So during the war years, there were only 3 Blum children that we knew of, my mother and my 2 uncles. The rest, unknown. Finally, in 1946, a miracle occurred. We received word that 3 of my mother's sisters were alive. They had somehow survived the camps. Moreover, 2 of them were married, and there was a niece and a nephew. Needless to say, my mother and my uncles were overjoyed. As for my father's family, completely gone. A brother, 2 sisters, his parents, no word. Now, we started making arrangements for my new aunts and uncles to come to the United States, but again, the United States didn't want these DPs, these displaced persons. Fortunately, Canada did. So starting in 1948, my new aunts and uncles started arriving one at a time into Montreal, Canada. And we started greeting them as they arrived in Montreal and made many trips back and forth. And eventually, when they moved to Toronto, we started going back and forth to Toronto. Now, my new aunts and uncles spoke no English, or very, very little English. They spoke Polish, and they also spoke Yiddish, which is a universal language of Eastern European Jews. Fortunately for me, my folks spoke some Yiddish at home, and I was able to pick up the language and communicate with my new aunts and uncles. So by the time the early 1950s rolled around, 6 of the Blum children were safe. There were 3 in Canada and 3 in the U.S. My mother and my 2 uncles in the U.S. And as for the rest of the family, the other 4 Blum children, nobody knew. Let's fast forward. It's the summer of 1971. I'm a bachelor. I'm living in New York City in an upscale area. I'm a buyer for a very large New York City department store. And I have a girlfriend. So the girlfriend and I decided we wanted to take summer vacation. And we decided we were going to go to the Caribbean island of Montserrat. Upon checking into the resort hotel, much to our surprise and pleasure, we met a young couple who were from Ottawa, Canada, Hank and Carol Sims. They were about our age. Hank was a musician and owned a music store. Carol was a teacher, and we hung around with the Sims couple. One day we decided to visit a local attraction of Black Sand Beach. And on that beach, we ran into a man by the name of Robert Barrington. So we spoke for a while, and I noticed that Robert Barrington had the same distinct East European accent as my aunts and uncles in Canada. And it turned out Robert was from Canada. He was a furrier, and he lived in Toronto, just like my aunts and uncles. So I said to him, Bob, how did a nice Jewish guy like you get a name of Barrington? And he told me a bit of his story. When Hitler's armies became active, he left his homeland and made his way to London, where he wanted to join the British Navy. But he was told that with a name like his, he should really consider getting a more anglicized name. So he got a hold of a London phone book, looked up under the B's, and he found the name Barrington. And he became Robert Barrington. Great name, great name. Well, the next question obviously was, well, what was your real name? And he said, Robert Blum. If you remember from the earlier part of my story, my mother's family name was Blum, and she had a younger brother by the name of Robert. Was this man standing in front of me my missing uncle? After all, the name was correct. The age was right. He was a Canadian, just like my Jewish Canadian aunts and uncles. He had the same accent. And like my Uncle Ben, he had left the land of his birth to join the army of a foreign nation. But it was not to be. This Robert Blum was an Austrian Jew who left Austria, made his way to London, joined the British Navy, and eventually made his way to Canada. We exchanged stories, we exchanged phone numbers and addresses, we bid each other farewell, and we returned back to the hotel to continue our vacation. Well, all good things have to come to an end. We bid goodbye to our friends the Sims, exchanged phone numbers with them, and I remember very, very distinctly telling Hank, saying, Hank, I'd love to visit you. I've been in Montreal a number of times, Toronto a number of times. I've never even been in Boston. Now, little would I know I would spend the first 3 months of my married life living on Commonwealth Avenue in Back Bay. But anyhow, we said goodbye to the Sims, returned back to New York, and that was that. A few days later, I got a call from the executive search agency asking me if I was interested in relocating and changing jobs. And I said, yeah, I'd love to get out to California. You see, my job was really, really getting me down. There was a great deal of pressure, and my boss was a miserable SOB. So we said, I've got a great opportunity for you, but it's not in California. And I said, yeah, where? He said, Ottawa, Canada. Ottawa, Canada, I said. That's the capital. He said, yep, you're right, it's the capital. But I had no idea where Ottawa, Canada was. I thought it was opposite Detroit, which would have made it Windsor, Ontario. As I found out, Ottawa was 3 hours north of Syracuse, New York. Can you imagine how cold and snowy that was? Anyhow, I said I really wasn't interested in Ottawa, Canada. He said, look, why don't you go up there? They're willing to send you tickets. You'll be an international traveler for a day. I said, what the hell? So, packed my resume, went up to Ottawa, Canada, met with 3 executives from the department store chain, went back to the airport, spoke to my friends the Sims, returned back to New York, and completely forgot about the entire situation. About a month later, I got a call from the executive search agency telling me that if I wanted, the job was mine. Well, by this time, I really had had it with work. The pressure was enormous. I was coming home with headaches every day, and my boss was even worse than before. So I said, to hell with it, I'm going to go. So, packed my stuff, broke my lease, and headed up to Ottawa, Canada. And the very first day on the job, as I was sitting in the store cafeteria, having a cup of coffee with my new boss, I couldn't believe who walked in the door. It was a young lady who I would marry a year later. And here we are 45 years later, living the good life on Cape Cod. Thank you. I'd have to pass on the microphone to Lisa Jo Rudy.
Now it gets a little written. Hi there. Well, my story starts with the fact that I grew up in White Plains, in the White Plains, New York Unitarian Church. My mother was a dedicated atheist. My father was a mamby-pamby kind of an agnostic, and so the Unitarian Church suited him very well. Mom was a Sunday school teacher, and so when Mom and Dad retired and they went down to Sarasota, Florida, they of course joined the Sarasota Unitarian Church. And so when Mom passed away about 14 years ago, she was cremated and her ashes were interred in the beautiful memorial garden at the church in Sarasota. Dad stayed up in Pennsylvania and lived for a number of years in a retirement community, and he started to decline, and he got worse and worse, and finally moved down to Maryland to be near my sister in a nursing home, and in the long run he passed away last March. And because he had had such a long decline and he had moved, there really was nobody to invite to a memorial service, and so we didn't have one. We just took his ashes down to Florida and we interred them next to Mom's. And we said some words, and I felt awfully empty. And I thought, I really want to do something more than this. I want to remember Dad in some way. So I just put out a little call to friends and family saying, it's like a positive memory of Dad, anything that you can remember. And people wrote back some very nice notes. Your dad was such a nice guy, he was such a great storyteller. And they all added one word at the end of their little story, Snoopy. Now you may think that means, he really loved Charles Schulz. He did. But actually, the story of Snoopy is a much more complicated story than that, and it's one that I'm going to tell you tonight. So the story begins like this. So Mom and Dad got married in 1958, and sometime around 1959, they moved out to the suburbs of New York. And Dad would go into New York City to call on clients. He was a food broker. And one afternoon, he was coming home from New York, and he went to Grand Central Station, and he heard somebody calling his name. And saying, Len. He turned around, didn't see anybody. This is Dad, he tells this story. So, Len, he turns around again, doesn't see anybody, but he sees a shop window. So he walks up to the shop window, and there in the shop window is a rubber Snoopy. Now, you guys may have seen one of these Snoopies. He's sitting there upright, and there's a little hole in his rear end. He's made out of rubber, and people that's the Snoopy he saw. So he walks into the store, buys 6 of these Snoopies, and brings them home. That's the story. I don't know exactly what my mom said, but I can tell you that by the time that I was born, and I was the first baby, so this is 1960, so I'm going to say maybe a year later, Snoop was already pretty much everywhere. And here is adorable baby me on my blanket. Right, so here we have, so now a year has passed, and this is a photograph that came not from my family album, but from my aunt and uncle and cousin's album. Apparently Snoop was now at the top of the food chain. And he was no longer Snoopy, now he was Snooping J-Dog, and he was important enough that my cousins, who were actually good at building things unlike my dad, created this special little pedestal for him. They took this photograph and they gave it a special caption because it was the official photograph of Snooping J-Dog from 1961. Now, I haven't seen any from 60 or 62. I haven't seen any like that, but I've seen many similar kinds of things, so you know that he was of significance. Now, Snoop pretty much went with us everywhere, and I have a number of photographs like this that look very much like, isn't that cute? She's got her cute little toy with her. But as you can see, that was not mine. Nor was that a toy, that was Snoop, and Snoop came with us pretty much everywhere. This was when we went down to Washington to visit Dad's old college buddy, and of course Snoop came along. And I want you to notice, if you can see, just a little bit, you can see that Snoop is wearing a cape. And you can kind of see that in that photograph. By that time, my mother was making capes for Snoop. She knitted them, or she would cut them out. She was not a good seamstress, but she would make like little S's, you know, on the back. And he had a number of them. But there were lightweight and heavy duty capes. The lightweight and the heavy because he would change with the seasons, with the planting of tomatoes and harvesting of tomatoes. So that was why he needed the capes and why he needed more than one. Now, here you see, I'm about the same age, maybe a little bit older, and you see I'm chewing on Snoop's nose. And you may think to yourself, why in the world would they let her chew on the nose of such a very important person? And the reason, as you recall, there was not one Snoop, there were 6, right? So I was the oldest of 3, and by the time, you know, all of us got through our teething, there was quite a lot of nose chewing going on. So there had to be a changing of the snooping corpus. And if that sounds like a Catholic term, it is. It was a very serious occasion to which I was not invited. Mom and Dad would invite their oldest friends to come and stay, like from on Long Island and from various other parts of the country. They'd come and they'd stay the night, and they would have a ceremony. And I would occasionally try to peek, and I was told very clearly that this was for adults only. I have absolutely no idea what happened. All I can tell you is that the next morning, there would be a new snooping corpus, and that snooping corpus would be ready for, you know, for life. And I have no idea whatever happened to the old corpus is not a clue. But it was a big deal. Now, this is my mom. It's not a great picture of Mom. She looks a lot better than that. But this was a picture taken in honor of her cheese souffle, which was a remarkable, wonderful dish. And as you can see, Snoop, of course, is sitting there next to her at the table. The fact that he was sitting at the table is not remarkable in any way. He sat at our table every single night. He started dinner with Dad. Dad sat at the head of the table. He would take Snoop before anybody ate. We would all be served. He would take Snoop. And then he would take Snoop and fling him across the table to my mother, who never missed, ever. And she would catch him. And Snoop would make the rounds, getting the best of everybody's food before anybody was allowed to eat. No matter who was there. It didn't matter who was visiting or who was there. And he would have the best, but oddly, for reasons that are unclear to me, he never drank alcohol or caffeine, which was weird because my parents really loved alcohol and caffeine. So in any case, the manifestations of Snoop grew in the real world. Year by year, more and more things would happen. And so, you know, as we were small children, we would have, and particularly me, we would wake up in the morning and we would talk about what we had done in Snoop's world, because he was not just Snoop, he was the Rex of the Schmear. He was Snooping J-Dog, King of Pleasantland. And Pleasantland was a place we would go at night, and we would wake up in the morning and we would talk about it. And of course we'd make it up as we would go along, and we'd sort of say, boy, was that a great party in Pleasantland last night. Boy, that was terrific. The snooping angels were great. They were angels, yes, even though my mother was a devout atheist. But did you see the one who came in late? He was, did you see how Snoop looked at him? Boy, was he embarrassed. I think he played a bad note. And then we would talk about who would come to the party. Now, little by little, Mom and Dad would add pieces to the story. So at one point, somehow or another, 100-acre wood got added to Pleasantland. And you may remember that 100-acre wood is where Pooh Bear lived. But in Pleasantland, it was not where Pooh Bear lived, it was where Pine J. Cone lived. This is not Pine J. Cone. This is Pine J. Cone had a great many children. And all the children in Pine J. Cone lived in this condo here. You can see it was just kind of like something at Palm Beach. So they would show up, usually, although they would often be late, and we would talk about that a lot. We also had manifestations of Snoop in the real world. So, for example, this was Snoop's, was rep, Snoop's representative in the real world when the corpus was not available. Because sometimes the corpus wasn't with you, but Snoop needed to be. We also had, this was Remp. He was kind of a jokester. We had, we had Dr. Dog, who would come when we were sick and look after us. And we also had Barbara and Emily, who lived in the car. Barbara was an elf on the shelf, and Emily was a little smiley face, and they were in charge of crossing bridges, along with all the snooping angels. So that was very important, and we would always have a ceremony for crossing the bridges, again, no matter who else was in the car. So this was kind of how things were. I don't know much about it, and as you can see, you know, it never occurred to me this was weird. I mean, Snoop was just there. And again, you know, my parents bought a house in the Poconos. Friends would bring presents for Snoop, you know. And that was fine. So, you know, as I say, about 14 years ago, my mom passed away, and Snoop continued to be part of my father's life, a little bit less, you know, the thing, but he was part of my dad's life. And about a year ago, Dad kind of knew that the end was near, and we were talking about what that meant to him. And he said, well, you know, I'm really not worried too much because, of course, when I die, I'll go to Pleasant Land and your mom will be there. And I thought, wow. Okay, well, I guess I'll be seeing you there. And he said, oh no, when I die, the door's closed. So Dad died. And, well, so we took his ashes down, and we buried the ashes with one of Snoop's representatives. He was a little Snoopy toy about this big that traveled around. His name was Snip. We had two, we were cool. The actual genuine Snooping corpus went with my sister, and I really have no idea whether the door's closed. I don't know whether I'll find myself in Pleasant Land sometime in the future, but I'm guessing not. But I will tell you this, we have a son who is autistic. He's now 21 years old, and he has an imaginary friend. His imaginary friend is named Froggy, and Froggy's nothing like Snoop. Where Snoop was demanding, Froggy is kind. And where Snoop wanted everything to be all about him, Froggy makes it all about everybody else. And I kind of like to think that maybe he's kind of a legacy. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Dave Iseman.
Hi, I'm David Iseman. The slide does not lie. So our story starts in a small town just north of Boston. Can this play or am I?
Kiss 108 is WXKXFM, Medford, Boston. 4 o'clock, Dave Iseman with an eye. And the first kiss of the 80s, your chance to win really big very soon is coming. Kiss 108.
So that was me as baby DJ. And before fate and my ex-wife directed me to do so, I got into real estate. But for years, I was in broadcasting. That was a fun station, Kiss 108. That was we broadcast from a town a few miles north of Boston called Medford, Massachusetts. Now, if you're familiar with that area, you may not recognize the name of that town, which is better known by its Puritan name, Metha. So if you go to Metha, you were in Medford. This cut was from a story that Channel 2 WGBH did on the story. I happened to be on the air. It wasn't a story about me, but on the radio station. And it was a disco station at the time, and we were mixing records live, which was terrifying on the air. And we had a great time, though. One of the promotions was a contest to go see the Bee Gees down in Providence. And what happened? Sorry, this happens a lot to me. So the limo goes down to the South Shore to pick up these giggling teenagers and brings them to Meffa, to the radio station. And we're going to helicopter them down to the Providence Civic Center to see the show. I mean, it's a thrill. It was exciting for me, and these girls were practically drooling with excitement. They won a bunch of other prizes as well. The parking lot at Kiss 108 was made of gravel, and so it was like a machine gun when this helicopter landed. That was just one of the fun things that happened at Kiss 108. And the reason that's the start of the story. I met a friend, her name was Joan. She was part of the morning show, and we're still friends. After I left KISS, I had spent some time at Magic 106.7, and then I moved down to Cape Cod. And years later, she called me, and I had a bit of a theater background, and she said, would you like to be in a movie? And at the time, I had time. So I said, yes. And she said, well, be at Goat Island in Newport, Rhode Island, and they'll fit you for a costume and everything. Didn't know much about it. I knew it was directed by James Cameron, who directed Titanic, so I said, this is going to be an A-list production. And I had never been in a movie before, except for some 8mm thing at Emerson College where I went. It was very grainy, and it was about a bus. That's all I remember. So they fit us out. I was an extra, and so was Joan. And they outfitted us with evening wear, and so I was resplendent in a tuxedo. The audition process was very simple. You practically ran by one of the production team, and if you had a look, you got cast. So they needed 200 people in the middle of winter. It was freezing cold out. It was February, and the shooting took place at Rosecliff, which is a cottage. Well, it's not really a cottage, but that's what they call it. The cottages, if you've ever been to Cliff Walk, are like a mansion, and they're big, and they're unheated too. And it was February, and it was really cold, and we're in these thin little shoes. We all have our down coats on. So we find out that Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of the stars of the movie, and I think that's his back there, and the yellow arrow is pointing toward moi. So there were two people on the planet that recognized me in the movie, me and my mother. So that's why I had to put that yellow arrow in. So my story starts at Cliff Walk, really, and this is my brush with Hollywood, and I got cast in this thing. It's freezing cold in February. We're in a giant ballroom scene. I'm just hanging out on the side. I'm an extra. I'm doing my best to act unobtrusively. And my friend, Joan, who you saw a couple of pictures ago, happened to be right next to me. Now, as they were checking us in, they emphasized, and there were signs that there were no photographs allowed on the set. I assumed it was because they didn't want any advanced publicity. So that was made very clear. And as we filed into the ballroom, the assistant directors were on a megaphone. They say, no photographs whatsoever. And there were no camera phones anywhere, so it was really hard to take a picture unless you had a big bulky camera, which my friend Joan happened to sneak in. So my first day of filming was her 6th, and I didn't know the backstory. I told her I was going to tell this story, and she told me the rest of the story. So we were getting ready to film a key ballroom scene. Tia Carrere was also another actress, was starring in the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and so did Jamie Lee Curtis. The movie was very successful. They made it for a little over $100 million, and it made $357 million. My check wasn't quite that big. But I did get paid for it, which was fun. They rehearsed the scene a couple of times, and what was funny is, because there was no heat in the ballroom, we all had our down coats on. So in one moment it looked like an LL Bean catalog. And then the director would call for a take, and we would shed our coats. and stashed them under the tables, and it was magically elegant. So the director called for a take, and Arnold and Tia Carrere are there. The ballroom goes dead silent. You can't have any noise on the set. And out of the blue, I heard a loud click. And the click emanated from a camera that was right next to me in my friend Joan's hand. And I said, "You have got to be kidding me. What about no photographs did you not understand?" Well, a wall started coming toward me. And the wall had 2 arms and 2 legs. And the wall had an image of Arnold Schwarzenegger's face on top of it. Only my laundryman will know how scared I was at that moment. He looks at Joan and says, "Give me the camera." And he takes it out, and again, this is when film was happening, and he took out all the film, threw it under the table, handed the camera back, and said, "No photographs." So the scene resumed. They called for a dinner break. Now, if you're ever in a movie, there's 2 words you really got to remember, besides no photographs, and that is craft services. Those are the caterers, and they always do a good job. That's where a lot of the $100 million went, I think, on the food. So we were having a good time. However, my friend Joan stayed back, and she was very embarrassed by the situation that happened with Arnold. But what I didn't know was that near the beginning of filming, her son had a car accident, and he was okay, kind of racked up, but he was going to be okay. And she had an opportunity in a pre-production meeting to meet with Arnold, who promised her a photograph for her son. So when I got to the set, it was day 6. So I didn't know that. All I heard was the click that rocked the ballroom. And Arnold came back in. Keep in mind, she was the only one in the ballroom at this point. Arnold came back in to apologize for embarrassing her in front of all the extras. And she explained that you promised to give me a photograph for my son who was in an accident. And he turned on his heel, went out, went to his trailer, and came back with a front page of the Boston Herald on which he was featured. Because it was a big deal having Arnold Schwarzenegger in New England. And he signed it and gave it to her. She gave it to the son, and he was very happy. So that's my story. My brush with Hollywood, and the moral of the story is when Arnold says no photographs, do not take out a camera. Thank you. And I know at least 2 of you are dying to use the bathroom, which is downstairs. When you go down here to my left, they're toward the front, and there's some water down there. And I hope you enjoyed the second part of the show. Thanks.
Welcome back. Not bad first round, right? Oh, so exciting. So we're going to go right into the next round. And then you're just going to love the next word tellers. I would love to introduce you to my very good friend, Nancy Bisienere. Do I need to adjust this?
I even wore my heels on. I wouldn't have to fix that. For sure. I'm not sure.
There you go, that's it.
I'm trying. I have to tell you first that this is not a new fashion trend, so don't worry about it. But this goes along with my story. So, if you are a native or a longtime resident of the area, you may remember that in August 19th of 1991, we had an event happen, and that was the arrival of Hurricane Bob. I should have been at Falmouth at that time, but I found myself at Mass General Hospital. And the reason for my visit at Mass General Hospital was that in the waning days of July, I was involved in a tug of war with a boat propeller, and I lost. And what I lost was my left thumb in Great Bay. So I went up to MGH to save time, and I had a team of plastic surgeons that worked to create a new thumb for me. And the way they did that was by attaching my left hand to my left thigh. And with the skin and tissue, they created a new thumb for me. But I also, because of that, I had to be attached to myself, as you see me now. So this was my outfit. It had a matching little Johnny underneath, so I was quite attractive walking around the hospital. But anyways, after they had done that, I had to spend a month at MGH. And the reason I spent that month was because I had a young family. I had a 2-year-old daughter and I had a 7-year-old son. And they were very afraid that they would jump on me or something would happen and there would be a problem. So I talked to my family and they agreed that they would take over child care duties for me while I spent my month at the spa. So anyways, what they did was phenomenal for me. My husband at the time, Mike, he worked and then he would take care of these 2 little kids, and especially after the hurricane, when you have no water and no electricity, no hot water, no electricity, you have yellow jackets flying around. I'm sure it was a great old time. The kids were probably happy that they didn't have to take baths every day, unless he had them outside in the sprinkler. I really don't know because I wasn't there. But he was phenomenal. And then I had my mother and my sister-in-law, Linda, who would trade off on child care duties. I have a wonderful sister, one sibling, who is in the audience tonight. And she came in, she's a nurse, and she came in to make sure that they were doing everything they were supposed to do. I didn't like that she moved me, especially those first few days. I kept saying to her, no, I'm comfortable. You don't need to move me. But she tortured me like she has my whole life. And she made sure I moved, so I guess you get bed sores. I don't know. And then I had my father who worked, and then he would drive up on regular occasions to visit with me, which was really nice. And he really should have had his own parking spot because he was there so often, but MGH didn't go along with that. So he had to pay. So that was my experience. And after I started feeling better, I started with my own exercise program. I started with the floor, but that's a square, so that gets really boring after a while. So I ventured out into other wings, and then I had to keep going. So I went down the elevator to the gift shop to get my occasional Milky Way, because even though the food at the hospital was fantastic, as I'm sure you will agree, well, at least I got to choose every now and then what I ate, but at least they brought it to me in 3 meals a day, so that was pretty good. But so I progressed, and I started to wonder, going down that elevator and walking around, you don't usually see too many people walking around as I am right now. I was thinking to myself, maybe they thought they should contact security or something, that maybe I'm trying to escape, but they didn't. They just kind of went their way, and so did I. And one of these days, I remember walking down, and you know, you try not to look in other rooms because you don't want to intrude on people's privacy, but this one woman, she looked at me and I looked at her and looked like she wanted some company, so I went in and talked to her, and we ended up having good conversations. And I never really asked her what was going on because I kind of felt that she had some mental or psychological things going on. But it was so nice when she left right before I did, and she called me at the hospital and she said, you know, you really helped me during that time that I was at the hospital. I really appreciate it. And she wished me all, good luck with my surgery, my final surgery at that time. So anyways, the month goes on, and at the end of the month, I thought, well, I've been in this for a month now, and it's comfortable enough, so I think I'm gonna bring it home. So I did. And, people that know me know that I'm the poster child of honesty, but I couldn't resist. I said, after a month, I think I deserve this, which now my family is really tired of looking at, especially in the summertime when I put this on as my robe. I do have other robes, by the way. But one good thing that happened, well, not good thing, but I shouldn't say that, but 4 years ago, my mother passed away. And 10 years after I had been at MGH, my mother had been there for some routine exam, some tests. So anyways, you put your clothes in a bag, and for some reason they gave her clothes to somebody else. So she had to come home in the Johnny and the robe. So you wonder where I get this exhibitionist thing here. Anyways, so it was nice because now I have a newer one. And you can see the logo here, which, it's quite attractive. Anyways, now I have a new robe. Sorry, Terry. So I'll be wearing this for quite a while, maybe. But I guess what I learned about being there was that you're stronger than you think. I'm glad I was an extrovert so that I was able to wander and I didn't care what people thought, so I could do what I wanted to do. And I'm extremely grateful that I have family that came through when I needed them. They are gold medal winning in their efforts and their love for me, and I really appreciate that. Well, this was my last surgery, a year later, and in that meantime, I had a year of my thumb looking kind of like a manatee, like their fins. I really didn't like that, but I survived, because this was my delicate hand, because I'm strongly right-handed, thank goodness. So this is my delicate hand, so I wasn't too happy. But my final surgery, they went back through the same incision and took a piece of bone off my hip, put metal and screws in here. So now I have a usable hand. And most people that, when I worked as a waitress and other things, it would, for years, and then they'd say, somehow it would come up and I'd talk about losing my thumb and they'd give me that look. Like, what do you mean you lost your thumb? I said, I never know you should, because I can do pretty much everything that I want to do. The only thing I have to worry about is that this is skin from my hip. So I have hair on here. Which it's part of my routine to trim my hair. Then I have to worry about it burning because that's what your skin does. And then in the wintertime, that rod, it gets that cold. And, so it's like, when you're out shoveling and then you come back in and it's like, oh my God. So it's warming that up. So that's pretty much it. So I never felt bad about what had happened because I saw so much when I was there, but also I knew that this was minor compared to what other people have gone through. And I've never really, I don't talk about it, it's just, it is. But I'm very happy about that. There's one other story though, that after I had this done, and the kids wanted to make me, a nail. So they cut a piece of paper and they put it on with tape. It didn't set too well when I took the tape off. So there was no more nails being put on Mom's thumb. But I also had this adult come to me, which really surprised me. I told her the story, and I don't remember, I hope it's not a friend of mine. Anyways, but she said to me, will your thumbnail grow back? I've never seen nails growing up your legs. So I had to tell her no. So sorry, that's not going to happen. So, but anyways, that is my experience, and I'm grateful for everything in my life, and I'm grateful to have two thumbs that are usable. And I guess my last thing is be safe out there on your boat, and thumbs up for boat safety. Our next presenter is Jeff Johnson.
Thank you. Oh, here we go with the clicker again. I'm going to tell you the story of how I accidentally became the architect for modern internet viral marketing. But that's a boast for later. I grew up here on Cape Cod, born and raised, and like many people who get to a certain age when you've been here your whole life, found a certain malaise around the age of 25. The lifer's dilemma. Can't get on the beach in the summertime, can't get in a restaurant, can't go to a club, too many tourists. Boom, it closes down, winter comes, everybody goes to sleep. I wanted out, so I packed up my car and a girlfriend, and I drove across country to California, where I stayed for 26 years. While I was there, I found other theater companies, as theater has been a passion in my entire life, and I did a lot of directing and such, but we had the same problems in California that we have here, which is to say space isn't readily available, so you would constantly be looking for rehearsal spaces, and wherever you could get them, someone's backyard, a garage, wherever. And I found comfort in my father's living room. My father had a very large living room, which to my delight also had a gigantic 70-inch television, which for me, to get off work, go to rehearsal, but get there early, get fed a meal, and just plop in front of the TV, watch movies, you know, which is another one of my favorite things. And I would watch a lot of the independent film channel, which was barely, just barely scratching the surface at the time. It was a new channel. And I started watching a show called Split Screen. Where'd you go? Thank you. Split Screen was hosted by a gentleman named John Pearson, who was very well known in the independent film world. He started out as a booker, and then he started giving money and time to young filmmakers. And on this show, he would get in his camper and go across country and, fish out people in the independent film world. And while I was waiting for rehearsal one evening, a story came up at the end of Split Screen about 3 college students who had mysteriously disappeared while filming a documentary about a witch. Now, they played a little bit of the footage. They had a package that was about 2 minutes long, and it was grainy and black and white and just terrifying to look at. I never thought I would see a bunch of stick people hanging in trees that would scare the shit out of me, but this did. Anyway, I looked at my dad, and he's got matching hair on the back of his neck standing up like mine is. And I said, Dad, how come we never heard of this? I mean, these kids disappear. A year later, their footage gets unburied in a basement, and nobody's ever heard of this. He said, I don't know, son, you're gonna have to look it up. So for the next 6 months, I become a Blair Witch hunter. I'm gonna find out everything I can about these people. I'm gonna find out what happened. I'm gonna find out why the American public doesn't know what happened. So you'll find out at this time, which is about 1998, the internet still didn't have much. People were still playing with it. They didn't know what to do with it. It was like a toy, People weren't buying anything. They were, it was a lot of porn. There was really not much of anything else. So you could go to the internet and you could look up the Boston Globe and get a headline, and that was about it. So I started looking at things like the FBI website, and I went to the local Maryland, archives for newspapers, anything I could find, but there, like I said, there really wasn't much. And then one day, out of the blue, I find this website, Haxon.com. Now, Haxon Films is the name of the company who have been given the rights to make a documentary based on this footage that's been found of these missing students. And I'm overjoyed because I'm like, okay, I've got a connection. I've got somebody who knows something about this. So I go onto the website. Okay, it's a lot of stills, like 6 or 7 of them, they've already shown on TV. There's no backstory, there's no nothing, there's a little bulletin board. And bulletin boards at the time were kind of, it was like cavemen chiseling on a rock, I mean, there was really nothing there. And these guys, they weren't even talking about the story. They were insulting each other and, making fun and, my brother's dumb, he does stupid things. And I'm like, what does this have to do with any of this? So I start leaving messages on the bulletin board. Hey, I'm really curious about these missing students. Can you fill me in and give me any information? Nothing. No responses from these people. Okay, fine. So I keep leaving messages, they're getting more and more hostile, and I'm kind of like, when you a-holes are done fooling around, can you give me some info, please? Well, not long after that, Heather Donahue, who's one of the 3 missing students, oops, thank you, her journal, which apparently showed up with the film, the missing film, they start posting pages out of this journal. And it's all about how she felt while she was lost, in these woods, and how they're being terrorized. And I'm like, finally, I'm getting something. It's telling me something. And they're putting up a page and a half, 2 pages at a time. Okay, so I go back to the bulletin board again. I'm frustrated, and they're still playing. Oh, we've got a foosball table, and I beat you yesterday. And I'm like, hey. Wake up, more pages of the journal, give us more story. And so, okay, fine. More pages start coming up, but then one day out of the blue, I get an email. Nope, we're backwards. There it is. I get an email from Eduardo Sanchez. He's the giant guy. And Daniel Myrick is his partner on the other side. These are the 2 gents that directed this documentary. And sent me a message, and he says, "Are you enjoying reading the journal?" And I was like, well, I don't know if I'd call it enjoying. I'm getting information finally. Could you please speed up the pace, put more pages up? And he says, dude, relax. We're just making a horror movie. What? It's not real. Are you fucking kidding me? It's not real? And I jumped up on a chair and I did a dance and I screamed and I threw my hands in the air and I said, "You guys are brilliant!" Oh my God. I said, "Do you know what you have here? That's unbelievable." I said, "I'm going to do whatever I can to help you. Whatever I can do, I'm going to do it for you." And the guy's like, "Yeah, okay, whatever. Whatever you want." So I start looking around and I find out there's a lot of free things on the internet back in the late 80s, like website space, which companies are giving away to attract more people to the internet. So I find a space that's not just giving away website space, they're giving me website space, bulletin board space, chat room. I mean, it was all free. So I just, and I hate to use the term fan site because, first off, I haven't seen the movie, so it could be a big piece of crap, I don't know. Secondly, I was in my 30s and I'm like, I'm not going to lower myself. I'm going to call it a support site. This will be a Blair Witch support site. And I said, I got to do more to get the word out. So what I started doing was going through all these directories online and finding all of these film sites from all over the world. And I think I had amassed about 200 sites from all over the world. And I just started leaving messages. Hey, there is this movie you people are not going to believe. You're going to miss out. Get to this site, haxon.com. And I started leaving these things all over the place. And I get an email from Ed one afternoon, and he says, what exactly are you doing? I explained to him what I was doing. I said, why? He said, well, I don't know. I mean, yesterday we had 2 hits on our site. Today we had 500 hits on our site. Okay, good. So this is working. So let's keep doing it. Let's keep pushing it. So in the meantime, they're finishing up the movie. They're making their horror movie. And I'm working on the internet, and I'm doing all of this, just jumping around to all these sites and, bringing people in and advising them, come to my site. The filmmakers will be there. They'll be in the chat room. They'll talk to you. You can post your messages or whatever you want. So my site starts getting a bunch of hits. So before you know it, we've got this internet cloud kind of forming that no one's ever seen before. It's getting huge. One day in October, I get a call from Ed, and he says, I just want you to know you're the first person we're telling our film got into the Sundance Film Festival. You can't tell anyone for 10 days. Fuck you, Ed. I'm telling everyone. But I managed to keep my mouth shut. Didn't say a word. And we all know what happened. The film went to Sundance. It got huge response. Bidding war went out. The movie got its, big release going in summer of '99. And, oh, hey, wow. That was interesting. Right there. Thank you. It got noticed by every major magazine, and I started getting calls. I gave quotes to Newsweek, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, Entertainment Weekly, and all I kept thinking was, Warhol's looking at me and he says, you're the 15 minutes I was talking about. But this great success for this project for these guys was enormous. They took a film that ultimately cost them $44,000 to make, half their equipment returned to Best Buy in Circuit City. And when it was all said and done, the film grossed $240 million worldwide. I never saw a dime of that. But, fortunately, I got to be good friends with these guys. And a year later, they came back to me and they said, we want to make a movie with you. And for 2 years, we worked on a movie together. And Universal dumped us. Nobody's even heard of it. It played on Netflix for 2 years and nobody still had ever heard of it. But regardless, this is a time that will never happen again, because the internet is now so washed out that this kind of marketing, this kind of work, this kind of detail to attention will never help a movie ever again. So I feel grateful to have been there during this time and to be a part of these guys. And that's my story. And now I'd like to introduce Emma Jackson.
So, I've been asked many times, and particularly because of my age, whether I have any tattoos. And a lot of my friends do. I have nothing against them, but I've always responded to that with, I have enough scars with enough stories that I don't need any more. So this is a story about one of those scars. It's also a story about people, experiences, traveling, and human nature. But mainly it's a story that your parents never want to hear your 19-year-old daughter did in college. So I grew up in Vermont, rural Vermont. Sounds redundant, but I mean, I literally had cows in my backyard. Not that we were farmers. The locals were kind of lazy with their fences. But that small bubble that I grew up in, I enjoyed for about 18 years. And then between now coming to this bubble in Falmouth, I decided to go to Los Angeles for school. I got into a small private school, Occidental College, a little bit outside of downtown LA. And when I got there, oh man, I thought that place was a soulless city, and I hated it. The space, the place, the people, but it turned to grow on me for many reasons. So after a couple weeks in college, after meeting some friends, and in particular friends with cars, because if you're aware of Los Angeles, it's quite a necessity, but quite a big expense for my age in particular. It's like having a boat around here. If your friends have boats, you get all the fun and none of the headache. So, a couple more weeks in, we're getting a little bored. It's a Friday night, and we decide, heck, I don't know, like any underage kids with that proximity to the border would do, let's go to Tijuana. So we all hop in my buddy John's car and make our way down, leave at like 8:30 at night. Most I can really remember is a lot of bells, whistles, and forced tequila shots, and waking up in old San Diego the next day and driving us all home. So after the success of that trip, I decided, why not plan another one? And I say plan loosely. But fall break was coming up, and my boyfriend from back home was coming to visit. That's a whole nother mistake that would take the whole night to explain. But I decide to book a resort in Rosarito. It's a little bit south of Tijuana, a little nicer, and I'm elated. I'm 19 years old, and it's the first vacation I've ever really been on by myself, and planned myself, and paid for myself. So the only cincher being, how do I get there? Because I clearly still don't have a car. So I talked to some of my friends, are you interested in going? Yeah, we'll come down for the night. You guys are staying the weekend, we'll party, it'll be a great time, have a lot of fun. So that's the plan. He comes out, gets the plane tickets, everything, shows up that Friday night, and I'm like, you guys ready to go? Well, I don't know. We might not really be into it. We got some other things going on. I don't think we're gonna drive down there, so you guys are gonna have to find your own ride. Okay. So I suck it up and take some more money out of the budget, buy some train tickets, get on the Amtrak from LA to San Diego, trolley to a turnstile to a eye-closing, seat-gripping taxi ride from Tijuana to Rosarito. And we finally end up on the main drag. And we go up to Papa's and Beers. It's like the main bar that's in Rosarito. And who is sitting on the deck enjoying quite a few cocktails from the look of it, because they got there a lot earlier than us. 3 of my friends and 2 others. So I accept their excuses and apologies for why they clearly could not take us with them. And I said, you jerks owe us some shots and at least a couple margaritas. But we enjoy ourselves, tie off a few, and being a 19-year-old in college and having your boyfriend visit, it's time to go check into the hotel. So we leave. It's about 20 miles out of Rosarito, and by that point, our bladders are both pretty full. And I'll tell you men in the audience, there is a time to let women go first, and this was one of them. I was being nice. He goes to the bathroom, and I don't even turn on the lights. I go straight out the door, onto the deck, and I'm floored. It's paradise. It's beautiful. It's more than I could have imagined it being, especially what I paid for it. Tile inlaid pool, infinity style, straight up to the ocean. People just sitting there enjoying themselves. I couldn't imagine anything better. And I'm so excited. I turn right around and floor it back into the room, straight into the closed glass door. I break it with my forehead. I get my hand stuck in the glass, and I'm screaming bloody murder as it's trickling down my face. One of the guys over at the pool is actually an EMT. He comes over right away. What's going on? You know, I'm all frantic. My boyfriend's out of the bathroom. Good God, what just went down? I was just trying to take a piss. And they get the first aid kit. No amount of anticoagulant or butterfly strips could fix this one. So back in the cab we get, and we go about 100 miles per hour this time. I'm not clenching. I say, go, 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 go. Get me to that hospital. I don't know what's going on. We stop shortly through the drug cartel. I forgot to mention that. Just a little outpost. They were really nice. Keep going to the ER, get in, 3 tight stitches later, as the whole time my doctor, who speaks not any English, goes, oh, superficial, superficial. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm superficial. It's my face, that's why I care. But lo and behold, all I came back with was a nice Harry Potter scar. No superpowers, but at least my hand was okay. And we enjoyed the next couple of days at the resort. People in town see us, the guys at the drug cartel. Oh, yeah, right through. They get a good kick out of it every time. And then after the worst night of my life, with the best bottle of tequila, we decided it's time to get back to LA. But after the ER, the taxis, all the extras, the train, not a whole lot of funds left. So, and mind you, the ER was actually less expensive than the 100-mile-per-hour cab. Maybe I was paying for speed, I don't know, but he got me there on time. And when I got home, the guy said, when he took the stitches out, oh, those are some of the best I've ever seen. So we buy a bus ticket from Tijuana to LA. And as we're disembarking at the border, we don't realize that the bus is gonna change. Luckily, we weren't the only ones. These 2 young Mexican women did the same exact thing. The 4 of us are bolting back from customs to go get our luggage from one bus to get it to the other. So wretchedly hungover, finally get on the bus to LA. Oh, thank goodness, I'm safe. We're gonna get there, get to Union Station. I know how to get from Union Station to my college. I ride the buses there. The $5 I have left will get us there. Not the dead cell phone to call my friends or anything else. But the closer and closer we get to LA, I'm like, I don't really think we're going to downtown, to Union Station. Not the area I know. And surely enough, my boyfriend, I tell him, go ask the bus driver. Where are we going, please? He speaks a little bit of Spanish, much more than mine. The bus driver neither answers in English nor Spanish, or at all, which I find a little fishy. Then as my boyfriend walks to the back of the seat, the bus driver talks rapidly to a guy next to him, which I think is a little fishy, and I'm finally getting over my hangover at that point, because I'm 19, it doesn't take that long now. And as we near the depths of downtown LA, I realize we're getting dropped off blocks from Skid Row at 7th and Wilshire, which this day and age, you can't find a $1,500 one-studio apartment in the gentrified area that it is. 13 years ago, 2 blue-collar 19-year-olds was not a place to be at midnight. So we get off the bus, and I'm more scared than I was in that Mexican hospital when I didn't know how bad my forehead was, because I have no idea how we're getting home. And the 2 girls that we bonded with, they got off the bus and got into a car with, I presume, their father. And they sit and wait. My boyfriend goes across the street with the gentleman from the bus to another guy in a car. He comes back, goes, oh, this guy's, he's a cabbie. He's gonna take us back. And finally, all trip, I go with my gut. And I say, oh, no markings, no meter, no cab. The girls are still there. They've watched the whole thing go down. So I turn to them, and they don't speak any English. And I just plead, where are you going? They said Glendale. My school's in Eagle Rock. It's a stone throws away. I put my hands together and I ask, please, can you take us with you? We have no money, but we need help. So we get in the car, and they drop us off right at the stairs at the entrance to my dorm. I thank them endlessly. And as I look up the stairs and think about all that we had gone through to get there and back, I laugh and I realize, you know, sometimes your friends can be jerks. And there's always assholes that are gonna take advantage of you. But sometimes the nicest people that you meet are the ones you can't even speak to. Oh, and that Mexican glass is really thin. And last but not least, Gary Vacon.
No. Can you do it for me, Shannon? Next slide. Okay. Thanks. Imagine a perfect day in Vineyard Sound. I mean perfect. I decided to go fishing. This isn't an unusual decision for me, those of you who know me. And I just didn't know that I was about to embark and create a set of events that turned into the biggest and most consequential lie of my life. A lie that I've kept a secret for almost 10 years. I guess until now. It was bluebird perfect. I mean, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, there wasn't a breath of wind. I got my boat in Green Pond and I headed for Middle Ground. Middle Ground is an underwater sandbar, just off of West Chalk. And when I got there, I mean, it's up there, right? When I got there, there was no current running, the tide was slack. I knew that meant the fish would scatter. But it was beautiful. I stopped the boat, I shut the engine off, I climbed up in the gunwale and I looked into the water and you could see the sandbar. It was like in the Caribbean, you could see the sandbar. The sand was so clear, you could see right down, and then you could take it deeper on either side to the dark, deep blue water. And it was just me. I was on the only boat there, just me on this little piece of heaven between Falmouth and the Vineyard. I gotta erase this. All right. So, I said, well, no fish. What am I going to do? But then I saw them on the sandbar. I could see these little shadows coming my way. I knew that they were striped bass. I had my fly rod with me, so I stepped back. I stepped back carefully. I was trying to be quiet. And I kept my eye on the fish. I got some line in the air, and at just the right moment, I let the line go, and I watched it roll out in that perfectly smooth water until it got to the very end where there was a little leader and there was a fly tied on the end, and that fly was just a little piece of feather and flash that I had made with a hook on it, and it dropped into that water like a pebble in a mill pond, 10 feet in front of the fish. Let me see, can I make the next one, Shannon? I'm going to have you help me. There we go, thanks, I see your hand. Ah, there it is, there's the fly. Okay, so the fish are coming at me, and I'm excited. My heart rate is going up. I'm tugging on the line. The situation is perfect. I'm tugging on the line, the little fly is dancing, the fish are getting closer. It's that perfect anticipation that every fisherman feels when something good's about to happen. Perfect, wonderful. How did I get like this? I mean, I'm 50. I'm 63 years old, and I'm obsessed with fish. It's just fishing, right? I mean, it's just fishing. Nah, it's never just fishing. It's never just fishing. I first learned to fish when I was just barely old enough to walk. My dad and my uncle took me fishing, and they taught me right away. I'm going to make Shannon do it for me. Shannon, next slide, thanks. They taught me right away that all fishing wasn't created equal. At the bottom of the hierarchy is bait fishing, and bait fishing was to be scorned. Bait fishing is cheating. You don't want to bait fish, never bait fish. In the middle is artificial lures, because you have to kind of fool the fish with artificial lures, but the pinnacle was fly fishing. These guys taught me that fly fishing was the only way. It was the hard way, and they believed you should always do it the hard way. And they were fanatical about this. I remember one time we were fishing up at the North River, up in Pembroke, and my dad's on one side of the river, and my Uncle Bernie's on the other side of the river, and the two of them one says to the other in a loud voice, "Hey, Bernie, I think I smell something," and the other one says, yeah, something stinks. And it was because a couple of bait guys showed up, and they were dissing the bait guys. It's no wonder we weren't beat up, right? And my uncle and my dad, and of the two of them, my uncle was the better fisherman. They were brothers, and brothers are always in a contest. But my uncle was better, and he could tell a better fish story too. My dad loved to fish, but my uncle lived to fish. And it was a lifetime fishing derby with these two guys. Who caught the biggest fish? Who caught the best fish? And fishing was important, and they took me fishing everywhere. My dad was a fuel oil dealer in town. My uncle was the police chief. They brought other business and civic leaders fishing with us, and they encouraged me at 10 years old to have a conversation with these guys like I was part of it. This had a big influence on me, a big influence, and they were good men. My dad delivered oil into people's houses that could never afford to pay because they were cold, and it was the right thing to do. And my uncle, he embraced the families that were in trouble. He was the police chief he knew in town and took those kids fishing with us. These were good deeds done without fanfare. There were no Facebook posts. There were no charity galas. They did it because it was the right thing to do. They were good men. And they taught me that, what it meant to be a good guy. But when it came to fishing, they were absolute and unabashed liars. They could tell a fish story that would curl your toes. And when I was a young boy, I was impressionable. I worshipped these guys, and they took advantage of that, and they'd tell these fish stories, and I'd buy them, hook, line, and sinker every time, and they loved it. My uncle told the story about fishing up in Canada. He called this, we fished up in the Miramichi River for salmon, and he called this pool in the river the Quagus. And the Quagus, according to Bernie, was full of these boulders the size of buses. Like 15, 20 feet in diameter. You'd have to climb on top of these boulders to fish. And the river ran rapidly between the boulders, according to Bernie, and it was loaded with salmon. And now one day, he says to me, they find this guide in the morning. They go to the pool, and they find this guy dead, face down in the water with his fly rod still in his hand. He's like this. So I said to Bernie, what happened to the guy? What happened to the guy? And he says, obviously, he hooked a large Atlantic salmon, and the salmon swam round and round the rock so many times, the guy got dizzy, he fell off, he hit his head, and he drowned. Now, of course, he never let go of his fly rod. No good fly fisherman ever would, even in death. So I said to Bernie, I'm not afraid. I'm a young guy. What's going to happen? Let's go. Take me to the Quagus. There's fish there. Oh, no. Way too dangerous for a young boy. I was probably 25 when I realized that Quagus was a fabrication. So when I wasn't fishing with these guys, Sharon, can I do the next one? The other way. Okay. So when I wasn't fishing, keep going. One more. There. When I wasn't fishing with these guys, I attended St. Patrick's Parochial School. At St. Patrick's, I learned the value of discipline and the power of guilt. I have to tell you, I got some assignments. I remember this assignment where I had to underline some words for homework, and I made the horrible error of drawing these lines freehand. What a terrible kid I was. And I had to write 100 times, you should underline your words with a ruler. So, when we weren't in class, we were marched over to the church. And the church for a young boy was a big, intimidating structure. And we sat in these enormous wooden pews. We listened to the priests and the nuns, and they told us these stories of hell and damnation, and we were all sinners. And you probably can tell I still have a few twitches from that experience. Now, although most people, if you ask them about me, they'd say, I'm a logic guy. I'm more of a Spock than McCoy. And I hold some things to be true that are spiritual, that aren't necessarily logical. I believe this without question, that when we die, it's not over. And I don't get there from religious teachings. Religious teachings are fine, but I don't get there that way. I get there because people that have died that have been close to me, I've always felt they had something to say to me that was profound after they died. Okay, so by now you're saying, I thought you were going to come up here and tell me a fish story. What's any of this got to do with fishing? Well, let me assure you that this is not only a fish story, but just about everything is. So we're back in Vineyard Sound, and I'm tugging on that line. Those fish are coming closer. My heart rate is up. It's perfect. I'm all by myself. It's beautiful. And on one of those tugs, I feel the line go tight. I pull the rod up, and the rod doubles over, and that fish takes off for the Elizabeth Islands. Perfect ecstasy. It's wonderful. 10 minutes, a tug of war. That fish gets close to the boat. I see the striped bass in the water. I reach down, grab it between my thumb and my forefingers by the lower lip. This is a technique every bass fisherman knows. I lift the bass up, I put it in the boat. It's about 35 inches of beautiful striped bass. Oh, wonderful. My heart rate comes back to normal, and I head back to Green Pond. My wife meets me there, and Janet, she takes a picture of me holding the fish. So I got my fly rod in this hand and a fish in this hand, and we have a nice dinner that night. And it's not just any fish, because I caught it the right way, the hard way, on a fly rod. I didn't cheat with bait, and it was the first over 28-inch keeper striped bass that I had caught on a fly rod. So I knew Dad and Bernie would be proud. Now, this was all back in 2006. Time goes forward. My dad comes down and fishes with me multiple times on the Cape, and as he got into his 80s, it got to the point where keeping his balance on a small boat was difficult for him. And so my wife and I, we hatched this idea. We said, Dad, why don't you go down and stand on the boat on the dock? So we did, and we posed him with the fly rod in this hand and his hand out like this, like he was holding a fish, but of course there was no fish there. And, Dad instantly, when you told him he would pretend he was holding a fish, he didn't hold a fish like this. He held a fish like this, because every fisherman knows that that's the way you take a fish photo for a perspective, right? So we fixed the lack of fish. Being a nerd, it's not that hard to do, right? We had Photoshop, so we cut the fish out of my photo, and we pasted it into his hands. Now, that was simple enough, but once you've got it and you've got all this technology in Photoshop, it's not that hard to grab the two corners of the fish. So we did that, and Shannon, one more, okay, and we printed this photo. We printed this photo, and it came out great. I mean, come on. So we framed it, and we sent Dad home with it. And when Dad got home, he immediately hung it up in his porch. And there's a chair he liked to sit in his porch, and he hung it up behind that chair because people would come to visit him and talk to him, and he'd have to explain the photo every time, right? So my uncle came to see him, and my uncle was the better fisherman, and he was very perturbed. I mean, my dad had caught a bigger striped bass than my uncle had ever caught on a fly rod. How was this possible? My uncle, but my dad never flinched. He said, no, yeah, I caught this. He told an elaborate story. And then Bernie called me up. He would call me up and he said, Gary, did your dad really catch that fish? Did you catch the fish? And I said, of course he did, Bernie. He said, Gary, was it for real? He always said that, is it for real? And I said, yeah, Bernie, it was for real. So, time goes forward again, and we get to the part of the story that I have more difficulty telling about. In 2013, both men died within 2 months of each other. I mean, within 2 months. Both funerals were held at St. Patrick's Church, the same church I had attended, and I went back to the church. The church had been renovated, but it looked largely the same. They kept the old pews. When I sat in those pews, I was transported back 50 years. I mean, this wasn't deja vu. I was there. I was that little kid again. I was sitting in those pews, my feet dangling, my legs weren't long enough to touch the ground, It was just being back there. And there was a big difference though. Both these two guys I worshiped, they were both gone. So, at the second funeral, my uncle's funeral, my cousin's husband, Tom, gave the eulogy. Tom has a great voice for public speaking, not like me, great voice. And he climbed up this huge pulpit at the front of the church, and he told fish story after fish story about these guys. And I was enjoying it, and I was sure my uncle and my dad were looking down on the ceremony and enjoying it as well. And I was sitting in those pews with the only two people that are here tonight that knew the story of the doctored fish photo. My sister and my wife. I was sitting in a place that defined guilt for me. I was defined my relationship with God. It was the epicenter of all the guilt I've ever felt in my life. Now you make me laugh, I shouldn't. Okay. In the middle of this, the eulogy, he's telling the fish stories. Tom looked down at me. Now the church was full. I mean full. And I'm sitting up the front row with the family, and he looked at me. And I'm like, he's looking at me. I mean, he looked at me. And he says, your dad never got over that picture, your uncle, I mean, never got over that picture of your dad with the fish. What have I done? In front of God, the church, the whole community, I've lied. I shall not lie. My whole fishing life flashed before my eyes. All great places they took me fishing, all the wonderful lessons they taught me about life, their snobbery about fly fishing, that photo that we faked, that fish I caught in Vineyard Sound, the fish stories they told me, the Quagus, the fish stories, that story about the Quagus and the fish stories. The fish stories. Wait a minute. These two guys had passed away, and people that are close to me, when they pass away, there's usually some sort of a message, and I really hadn't heard anything. Or had I? You bastards. You bastards, this is another fish story. And you caught me in hook, line, and sinker, just like I was a little boy. I mean, you guys fabricated this beyond the grave. This is a fish story that transcends death. How did you do it? Well, Dad, Bernie, I love you guys. One last lesson for me, I guess, huh? Life, yeah, and maybe even death is a fish story. But it's never just about fishing, is it?
Okay, so let's hear it for round 4. Thank you all for coming. Please think about April, and I've had a couple of you come up to me who want to do it in April with us. So if you know anybody who has a tale to tell, email me. My email's on the program. And thank you so much. Can we have the house lights? Thank you.